Welcome to Conversations with Artists, hosted by the University of Maryland Center for Art and Knowledge at the Phillips Collection. I'm Catherine Rogie, Exhibitions Coordinator and Manager of Academic Initiatives. Tonight, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce this program. Conversations with Artists is a joint program between the Phillips Collection and the University of Maryland. Founded in 2006, the series provides an opportunity to hear from and speak with leading contemporary artists in an informal setting. Participating artists also conduct studio visits with UMD students in the MFA program. Like so many things these days, those are virtual right now. The Phillips Collection is situated on top of the ancestral and unceded lands of the Piscataway people, and I would like to pay our respects to their elders past and present. This acknowledgement reminds us of the significance of place, the continued existence of Indigenous and other people, and the museum's commitment to building respectful relationships with those who call these lands home today. Tonight, we are featuring DC artist Robin Rose. Robin Rose works within the demanding field of encaustic painting. Through an incomparable mastery of this difficult medium, one of the oldest forms of painting, Rose presents concepts germinated from the latest technological advancements, archaeological discoveries, and systems analysis. Rose's abstractions suggest something familiar, driving the viewer toward an intuitive understanding of the complex content through a far-reaching variety of color, textures, and visual effects. Robin Rose's work is included in the collections of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Phillips Collection, among other private and public collections. He will be joined in conversation this evening by my colleague, Vesela Sretenović. Vesela Sretenović has been a senior curator of modern and contemporary art at the Phillips Collection since 2009. Upon her arrival to the Phillips, she initiated a series of ongoing art projects called Intersections, inviting contemporary artists, national and international, emerging and established, to engage with the museum's permanent collection and architecture to present and create new work. Additionally, Sretenović has organized numerous solo exhibitions of prominent artists, including Robert Ryman, Ellsworth Kelly, Antony Gormley, Richard Tuttle, Los Carpinteros, and most recently, the first museum retrospective of Cuban artist Zelia Sanchez. She is currently preparing two other projects by Australian artist Marley Dawson and Harlem-based Sanford Biggers. Prior to joining the Phillips Collection, Sretenović spent 10 years as curator at the David Winton Bell Gallery, Brown University, while also teaching contemporary art and art theory at the Rhode Island School of Design. Earlier in her career, Sretenović worked for the University of Buffalo, SUNY, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art. She holds a BA from University of Belgrade, former Yugoslavia, an MA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and a doctoral degree in the humanities from Syracuse University. Thank you both for joining us evening, and thanks to all of you joining us from home. As you listen to Robin and Vesela this evening, please type your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will have a Q&A section at the conclusion of this talk, and we look forward to your questions. Without further ado, Vesela and Robin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Catherine. And it's my pleasure to be here with Robin in his studio, in his home, Forest Hills, on the verge of Rock Creek Park. We're neighbors, and that made it easier for us to get together and actually experiment with an amateur live stream. So bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties, forgive us. We have Robin's wife, Julie, behind the camera. She is with us and working with us to make this event hopefully exciting for everybody. But we decided to start off this evening, this conversation, actually not with words, but with sound. Robin is known best for his paintings, but there is an other side to his life and work. So we'll play some music. Okay. Catherine, can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So Robin, we were listening to urban verbs.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about your career as a musician and what the urban verbs were and what we were listening.
Like so many people of my era or generation, I started playing music when I was 16. So I was in bands. My first band was the Wombats, then a band called Common Ground, a band called Smitty's Band. And when I got to DC in 1976, I was, had played in a lot of different bands. And I met Robert Goldstein, who ended up being the librarian at NPR. That's how you might know Robert's name. And Robert and I was hanging artwork at Henri Gallery, which was right next door to where I was living. And I was living about 1,000 feet from the Phillips art collection. And the funny thing, it was a circular kind of thing because I knew so many people that worked at the Phillips as guards and stuff. And at the same time, the art strip, or what we used to name R Street, used to be the main center of the Washington, D.C. art scene. And my friend Robert had just graduated from Foreign Service School at Georgetown, but was hanging artwork for a part-time job. And he really wanted to be just what I wanted to be, was a rock and roll musician, because I'd always been a rock and roll musician, but I'd always painted too. It was never a situation where I only painted and only played music. I always painted, always played music. I painted everybody's motorcycle helmets and guitars and water skis and stuff in high school. And so when I got to Washington, D.C., I had my first one-person show at the National Academy of Science. And Robert and I became friends. And we started practicing in our apartment, which is 1512 21st Street, which is 1,000 feet from the Phillips. And we put the urban verbs together, and we became the in-house, to put it bluntly, art rock band in DC. It was at the very beginning when the punk thing was really big, and we had all original music, and it didn't take long for us to get to play at CBGB's in New York. And we played at the CBGB's about 10 times, and Brian Eno had come to CBGB's with Chris France, who was Roddy, my drummer's brother, to see Chris's little brother's band. And Brian said, I love you guys, I gotta record you. You're kind of doing what I had hoped Roxy would do. Roxy Music was Brian Eno's band at the time. Brian Eno is probably the most famous record producer during the period from 1975 to 1980. I mean, you name it, he produced so many great bands. And so Brian came down, saw our band, bought a mobile unit, recorded us. We became the Urban Verbs. We had a tape by Brian Eno that really gave us entree to every single record company in the world. And everybody wanted to hear it. So we negotiated with Warner Brothers to make our first record. And then Brian had to go back to England because his visa ran out. And we ended up working with Mike Thorne, who I'm still very close friends with. And Mike had just finished working with the incredible band from England called Wire. And they were also an art rock band. And at the time, nobody wanted to use that moniker, art rock. We wanted to be punks, we wanted to be hard, but really the Urban Verbs were art rock. We drew our inspiration from bands like the Doors or the Velvet Underground. There was a kind of a mysterious edge to the music.
What about Art of Noise?
What
about Art of Noise, Ben?
We listen to all those people. I mean, I went back, I was a little bit older in the band. I'd listen to people, like Walter Carlos, and I listened to John Cage and avant-garde music of Stockhausen and stuff like that. But when the Urban Verbs started, I played guitar, but it didn't take long for me to realize that there was going to be one guitar in the band, and that was Robert. Robert was the leader. And he and I had a very different kind of style. I played very abstract type guitar playing. So right before we made our first record, I just shipped a synthesizer and started playing the synthesizer as a sonic instrument, not just as a musical keyboard. And so I've kind of fell into the Brian Eno school of sonic electronic music, and I brought it to a kind of pop band, which was the Urban Verbs.
And how did you come up with the title, Urban Verbs?
Roddy, my lead singer, came up with Urban Verbs, and that was something I've never really known the source of that brilliance, but it was, people used to say, one time somebody said, well, why don't you just call yourself the Dangling Participles, and that'll get you a good review. So I said, the Urban Verbs was the name of the band. That's what we stuck with. So, and it's actually served us well. It's unique enough for people to kind of remember it.
So what we're looking at are 3 different albums, cover of 3 different LPs.
We made 2 record albums for Warner Brothers, and that we worked on the second album with a group from Steve Lillywhite, who was a record producer, who had just finished the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels album, and which was a completely different sounding album. It ended up sounding so completely different than our first one. I wish at the time that we could have done it ourselves, and we'd had the technology and the ability to make our own record, because I think we would have gotten closer to the sonic quality that the band really had live. Because live we were very symphonic, but at the same time we really had an edge, and it was kind of an unusual sound. It is still today. You heard The Good Life, that was the song I just played, and that's really probably kind of shows off what I do or did best in the band, because it's this actual sonic quality of the sound. It's not just the melody. It's not just the musical quality. It's the actual sound was unique.
So, Catherine, can we have the next slide, please? The reason also we started off with sound is because there is a very deep connection between the visual art and the sonic art. I'd rather call it sonic art actually than music. Perhaps maybe that's an even better way to approach it. And here's the work that is in our collection with the same title, Urban Verbs, from that time, 1979. Right. So speaking of that integration, or this really symbiotic relationship with the two, tell us a little bit more about this work. And the relationship of sound to visual.
And also the period of time was a very interesting period of time in Washington. The subway had just been built, which if you think of the subway metaphorically, was like an artery system for a city that had never had that before. And it made the city far more cosmopolitan in a way. And one of the things you can see in this the image is like a trapezoid in the bottom of the painting. I had played music for so long, I was used to sitting on stage looking out at the audience. And it was a very hypnotic, and I wanted to create a kind of a visual device that functioned hypnotically. And so I came up with this almost like an envelope, upside down envelope, where you have the trapezoid that goes into the interior. Well, that trapezoid is only going in the interior as an illusion. You're forcing that to happen with your mind. If you want to, you can make the trapezoid stand up and objectify the object, or make it go in and subjectify the object, folding in and folding out. So you have the ability to fold it in or fold it out. And so it puts the aesthetic in your control, not just mine.
But it's very spatial, which also brings me back to the music. The
Right.
music is very environmental, very ambiental, very spatial, very abstract, just like the work itself, the visual work itself. And it's almost like a chamber that encloses you, very much like music or sound.
Yeah, you're right. It's more like, it's like what it visually looks like what it feels like to play music in a way. And also the waveforms, I'm very interested in the waveforms. There were vertical waveforms, horizontal waveforms, and then the mixed mesh or grid that's created with the waveforms going vertically and horizontally at the same time.
And we can go to the next slide, Catherine.
Yeah. This is a better example of what I was saying. So you can see the trapezoid goes into the interior, or if you want to, just make the trapezoid stand up. And what happened is, it's almost like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. People think I'm crazy when I talk like that, but it actually functions that way. You pat your head and you rub your stomach, and you're integrating your left and right lobe of your brain. And what happens after a while, it becomes hypnotic. And pretty soon you lose that distinction between object and subject, and it becomes one complete field of energy. And after a while, what happened in terms of my painting, one day the trapezoid disappeared, and I had arrived at a certain place in the painting where it was no longer necessary to see it as an object or a subject.
It's very translucent, makes me think of Robert Irvin early work, and also of Wolfgang Leib. And I know Leib is one of
it's one of my favorites. Absolutely.
I
saw him in Germany. It just blew my mind. And I like eccentric artists. I like Harvey Quaitman. I like Richard Tuttle. I love Robert Ryman. I love Harvey Pinkham Ryder. And I saw that at the Phillips. I had never seen real art until I was 21. I'd gone to art school, but I'd never been in a real museum. I'd seen other people's art, but I'd never been to a museum until I moved to DC. And when I saw it, Arthur Dove, I mean, my God, the Phillips, because the intimacy of the Phillips, the scale, and even today, I'm affected by the scale of the art in the Phillips. More so than anything else. It's the scale, the intimate thing where you're standing at just enough distance from the object to actually see its fabrication, but not so close that your peripheral vision is way out here, like a really large painting. It's here, and there's a intimate intensity that I find fascinating to this day. And it was a real education for me. I used to go there all the time. Like I said, I lived 1,000 feet from the Phillips. And to this day, I walk in there and just think, oh my goodness. And the Phillips sounds so good too. Such a great place to hear music. It's a great place to hear music.
Still is. We can go to the next slide, which this is maybe a good moment to actually rewind the film and say, okay, this is a quote I love that I read somewhere. I'm frustrated curator, archaeologist, and collector. Maybe we can speak a little bit about that, but also tell us about your background. You were in Florida, you went to school there.
Yeah. I think that probably the thing that informs me the most, I heard that John Glenn was an only child. So that as a kid, that was really important for me. I was an only child, and I was incredibly curious person, and I would very young I was very interested in finding things, artifacts, fossils, arrowheads. I collected marbles. I was a rock collector. I just was fascinated by things that you see. I started collecting marbles when I was 6 years old, and you could hold them. You could never hold a marble the same way twice. it's incrementally going to be different. And my grandfather gave me his marbles, and they were just so beautiful to me. I'd hold them up the sky, and I was so very interested in color and texture and mutability of design. But I was just a kind of person, as a child, I learned how to entertain myself. And I think that's one of you find a lot when you talk to artists, you find people that know how, or for whatever need they had figured out how to entertain themselves. And I would go scuba diving. I had a 10-foot boat with a 3-horsepower motor, and Florida's full of streams and rivers, and some are perfectly clear. And I would go scuba diving by myself when I was 16, looking for artifacts on the bottoms of the river.
So what made you decide to go to study art?
I was the in-house artist. All my friends were football players. They weighed 160 to 250 pounds, and I was 138 pounds. So I formed a band, the Wombats, my Aunt Lucille, my favorite person in the world, was an artist, and she had studied with Jerry Farnsworth on Siesta Key in the 1950s in Sarasota. And Sarasota, Florida was a big art scene in the 1940s and 50s. And that's where the Ringling Art Museum is now. And my aunt had studied portrait painting, and she was a beatnik. She looked like Veronica Lake. She was gorgeous, and she wore black pedal pushers and a turtleneck sweater, smoked a Pall Mall, had the hair come up across her eye, and she was an incredible painter. And I was, my mother and daddy traveled a lot, so I spent a lot of time with my aunt.
So that's
That's
first
where it came
connection.
from. Yeah, my aunt was the one that inspired me, and she had kept inspiring me until she passed away. She would always, you need someone in your life to encourage you. I think I say it all the time. Encouragement is the single most important thing an artist can have, and it may come from various sources, but you've got to have some kind of encouragement.
Can we go to the next slide? So this is the beginning, and then you started to study painting, and you got into encaustics. Tell us a little bit more about that, and then we can look around the studio and actually see a lot of art before we go to slides.
Yeah, when I first started out painting in high school, I was just like everybody else, with pastels, watercolors, and I was the only guy in Ms. Crusoe's art class, and Ms. Crusoe was Italian and about 4'9", and would run around the classroom screaming, "Passion, passion." and she really, I loved her, but I was the only guy in the class, and people would bring me motorcycle helmets and water skis and things, and I was really good with an airbrush, and I would paint cars. So I had a spray gun paint cars. I'd do metal flake and spin drift, all these really advanced kind of bizarre pigments and stuff. So when I got to college, I had already started working on this idea of painting on the back of plexiglass panels, and I was using lacquer and spray guns. And what happened was, at a certain point, when I got into graduate school, I came in contact with Carl Zerbe, Z-E-R-B-E. Carl had been sort of the progenitor of contemporary or modern encaustic painting. He brought back all the techniques from the ancient past. He was taught in school in Boston and ended up in Tallahassee, which is a very kind of small, quaint place with a huge university. And I was living on a commune outside of town, playing with my band, The Common Ground. We were like the Grateful Dead, or the Redneck Grateful Dead. We were great. We could play for hours one song because nobody could remember the lyrics. So we would just start the song off, and an hour later it'd be over. But anyway, I would go into school and graduate school. And one day, Carl Zerbe was my main professor. And I was looking at the paintings, I was thinking, I'm painting on the back of these plexiglass panels. There's no surface, there's no texture, there's no touching. I think I'm missing something. And, you never want to really paint like your professor, but I was listening to Carl, and I said, I can do this. And I went out, bought the basic materials to start, and that's when I started. And so when I was in graduate school, my other professor was a guy named, Trevor Bell. I'm so sorry, Trevor Bell. And Trevor was from England. And Trevor was the coolest guy in the world. He looked like Alan Bates, this really great looking guy with a cool accent. He said, "Robin, You can't do both, Robin. You can't be a guitarist and a musician and a painter. You've got to make a decision. I had this guy in England, and I told him the same thing, this Brian Eno, that's the connection. And he said, I told Brian, you can't do both. You've got to either be a musician, quit this Roxy music thing, or you're going to be an artist. So anyway, that was a kind of a weird connection that I later made with Brian 20 years later. But Trevor was right. It's almost impossible to do both professionally. But the interesting thing about painting is painting just can keep going on and on and on. And it's hard to find a real good audience for your work after about 40. So, I mean, musician, you know, it's hard to play live after about 40 if you're really going to do it seriously. And so the painting thing really took off for me, and I've kept with painting. I still play music, but I paint. That's what I do. I'm a painter.
But going back to encaustics, which is one of the oldest mediums that exist, I'm talking, I think of Copts art, and then in Egypt and, you know, pre-Christian art. Not only the technique is so elaborate, but this the feeling of tactility and flesh in a way is amazing, but it's a very, very laborious process.
Correct.
And we have this unique opportunity to be in your studio, and thank you for opening your door. Perhaps you can walk around and show us and tell us a little bit about technique, and tell us how each of these smaller canvases that we have here is unique, and how do you mix it with pigments, and how do you work, and show us a little bit about your process.
Okay.
As we look at the
works. I will. Should I stand up?
Yes, maybe just walk around and tell us. Some of the works are earlier, some are more recent.
Yeah, I mean, these paintings, I just kind of put these up because I have a show going on right now. This was empty, so I pulled a lot of stuff up. Well, one of the things about encaustic is that I work on honeycombed aluminum panels. This is a panel that I would make.
We can't do this in galleries, guys. So
yeah, that's right. So one advantage. So I buy honeycomb panels. The honeycomb panels, aluminum panels, aluminum skin. And if you were to pull it apart, it looks like a beehive inside. So the honeycomb, it's aluminum, the beehive, and the aluminum. Then on top of that, I mount linen. So the armature is classic. I'm painting on linen like people have done for the last 500 years. But the encaustic technique that I'm using is essentially beeswax, carnauba wax, Damar varnish crystals that are melted, and then pigments, all kind of dry pigments that I make. So in other words, I make the paint from scratch. And I make the panels from scratch. So I'm kind of an auteur.
You're an alchemist.
Yeah, I can make things in my hands. That's not really so hard for me. Other people, I would say, if you're going to try to do encaustic, I would buy the pre-made encaustic paint, which you can buy nowadays. But when I started this, you couldn't buy that. I started really seriously making these paintings about 1978. And so I make my own paint. And one of the things about encaustic painting is you're painting hot. So the paint is melted in a pot. And at 180 degrees, you take the brush out. And this is where the music comes in. Let me show you. So I have the hot pigment. I come across the canvas, 1001, 1002, and it's dry. Because it's like if you've ever dropped wax on your hand, how long it takes it for it to dry, it takes no time at all. The difference is that the carnauba wax and the Damar varnish are hardeners, so it gets harder than the wax that you would have from a candle. Okay, but where this comes in a very similar way is the 1002, 1003, I kind of use that a lot. It's like this, 1002, 1003, the sound is gone. So the sound, the attack is there, the sound lingers, and it's over. So in a way, my painting technique is a little bit like music in the sense that you're not waiting for the paint to dry.
It's that moment, capturing a moment.
It's captured, exactly. You capture the moment, and then you capture another moment, and another moment, and another moment. So it builds up and out.
But
right?
it's very physical and very much about movement.
Correct.
And so you told me that you're working on horizontal on the floor or on the table, right? Not vertically, but horizontally. Right. Is it because you can move around?
It's because I can turn this and get a trance state. Because when
so
I'm
it's
painting,
a dance, essentially. Yeah.
When I'm painting, there is no up or down. In fact, the last decision that's made, usually I make a decision, it's gonna be a horizontal or a vertical painting. If the decision is gonna be a horizontal painting, the last aesthetic decision I make is which is up, which is down. And so you kind of look at it, why did you say, why is this at the top and that's the bottom? I don't know, but for some reason, when I finish the painting, I'm so accustomed to it, it kind of tells me through its weight, what's going to be vertical would be horizontal.
And what about patterning? What about scale? What about colors? How do the choices of those come about?
I often use the term onomatopoeia, and I think that really kind of describes what my paintings are about, really. I mean, there's a certain mysterious aspect of the way I make these paintings. First, when I come into the painting, there's not a trace of how I got in it. And there's also no trace of how I got out of it. There doesn't seem to be a start or an end. And also the paintings are like sushi. They're cut out really sharp and crisp. And the
edges are really interesting.
Yeah, they oscillate off, they come off the wall very flat. But what it is what the significance of the paintings, which I think a lot of people miss when they see my work, is I really did kind of create a different technology for each painting. So the technology is a little bit like the way I was in a recording studio. You decide what you want it to sound like, and then you figure out how you're going to make that sound. Sometimes you put the amplifier at the end of the room, you put a plexiglass in front of the drums, you detune the guitar to an open tuning, you use foot pedals to control the texture, same thing with these paintings. I mean, I kind of decide, I get a roadmap of the painting in my mind, and then I have to kind of configure ways to make it. I mean, this painting right here is made so completely different than this one. If someone to really analyze them, they're not even close. This is like a slow song, this is a fast song.
In what sense they're so different?
Pardon me?
In what sense are they so different?
Well, first of all, the application of the paint.
The patterning is very different.
And even the patterning and often what I do is, and this is part of my secret agenda, I excavate. I'm like an archaeologist. I'll make the event come out, and then I'll stop at a certain point, and then I have to make an event that goes back in. The event meaning the painting reaches a point where it can't get any heavier. Does that make any sense? Or thicker or more vibrant or whatever. And then often I'll have to excavate back to a point a little bit the same way when you tune two strings. When one's vibrating like this, and then when they come sympathetic, then they vibrate at the same time. That's kind of what I'm doing. I vibrate the surface so it will become integrated visually at a certain point.
So which one is the earliest among?
Yeah, this one's 1993.
Wow, and it's more luminous. It's
Yeah.
In terms of the.
Yeah, this is when my daughter was born, Hannah.
Oh, I remember.
And I like to say Hannah's over here. I found this kind of thing on the painting. A trace of Hannah.
Yeah, you moved that painting. It was here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Judy was looking around the room. She said, let's make it look a little bit better. And I think she's right. And so, yeah, and let me show you some of this stuff.
So let's take a break a little bit. Have a sit.
Yeah.
So another thing that we can go back to slides, Catherine. Okay, that's his way. So predominantly, what we were looking here are smaller scale works.
Mm-hmm.
But then you mentioned to me that it's very different working in a large scale.
So
what we're looking now here is one of the paintings that was commissioned, right? Off a very large scale. It's IMP building on F Street. And a second slide, Catherine, it's another work. Yeah, these two work were commissioned, very large scale.
They're 11 feet, 8 feet high by 11 feet
Yeah,
wide.
it's very deceiving watching them
I know it.
on slides. Tell me, how is different for you working in such a huge scale in this kind of laborious technique?
Right.
And for the specific site.
Yeah.
That is very cold looking.
Yeah, in some ways this one, I mean, first of all of my paintings are very light active. They really do, and they're very mutable. They have different personalities depending on where the light is shining on the painting. That is on purpose. I love to make paintings you can't photograph. And I know it's so perverse and twisted, but it's some reason I've always liked that idea that that's what makes a painting to me a little bit different than a photograph or another type of form. That they do change as you approach them and move around them. Mine especially, because I use all kind of different kind of pigments. I'll use fluorescent pigment, I'll use pearlescent pigment, all kind of metals, graphite, you name it. Anything to get that secondary, and what I call as harmonic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain sort of corona or harmonic, a whole which is greater than the sum of its parts. I'm always looking for that in the paintings. And so, and also my paintings, the more you look at them, you kind of, there's an essence that's a sameness, but they really do have different personalities. I mean, it's like, you know, people of the same family may have kind of overlapping personalities. The bigger paintings, these are done in sections of 3. I don't really like to work with assistants, only because when I get started working, I really do try to create a trance state. And people, you know, well, you know, it's true. For me, and people who, they call it the zone, you know, basketball players, so-and-so's in the zone, or golfers, you know, that you know, putt, or politicians making a speech or whatever. It's a zone. And the problem that I've always had with assistants, that if you're in the zone, you have to stay in the zone and you have to fight to be there. Like a fight for my right to party, you know, like the Beastie Boys, you have to fight for that zone. And I don't like to have to fight for the zone. I would prefer to just be left alone and do it. So the problem with encaustic is it's difficult to do it on a large scale. And also the panels get really heavy. But I'm capable. I did a commission years ago for IBM, and the paintings were 16 feet by 16 feet. They've got to be the largest encaustic paintings in the world.
But they come in sections then.
Yeah, they came in 8 sections. Yeah. They weighed, I don't know, whether 2,000 pounds each. It was just, they're huge. But anyway, I did that with my assistant at the time, Warren Eisenstein. Warren's a painter in New York, very good Warren. And, but I mean, I can do large paintings. And what I've learned is this, that my paintings, they're like dehydrated herbs. You just have to add water and they'll get bigger. So these paintings will blow up, you know, or compress. Right now, what I really like about them is they're very compressed, like an herb is compressed, it's dehydrated, the excess out of it. Dense, yeah. And that's one of the, I guess the key, that they are easy to expand, to make bigger. But I like the intimacy. I really like Robert Ryman. I like the intimacy. You know, I mean, there's something Tuttle's work. I mean, it's like this. There's something about it that's within reach, close at hand. You know,
there's a certain sensitivity or sensuality in the works, especially in the smaller works, and it's more precious, maybe.
Yeah,
that's the word.
This painting over here is a good skill because this is very danceable. And when I paint it, I'm really moving like a dancer in that painting. That size is great. I love it. And I could get, do you want me to show you how to do this?
Definitely. Why don't we look at, Robin is going to demonstrate us how he works, again, incorporation of sound and then visual marking and how some of these paintings happen. So let's look at him. Here's the performance. All right, tell us what you've done.
Okay. In the early 1980s, Kevin McDonald, who worked at Phillips, very close friend of mine, he's a great pencil drawer. He and I got together one night, and I'd been into urban verbs, and I had all this equipment. And I said, you know, I've got this idea of drawing with sound. And he and I would sit every weekend. We worked on this idea called Scriptronics. Kevin's passed away, a few years ago. Great loss for me, but we were great friends, and we came up with this drawing technology. The interesting thing about this is there are probably more guitar players in the world than there are women over 50. It's like unbelievable everywhere you go, and everybody's got an amplifier and a bunch of foot pedals. And so in a way, this is kind of a way for somebody to take what they've learned playing music and adapt it to visuals. So what I do is I call it Scriptronics. I use this technique to get into, again, a trance state where you're breathing. So when you look at my paintings, they often have a sense of rhythm, or they have a sense of beat. And the one thing they really do is they have a sense of breath. And they rise and they fall, or they go boom, 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 boom. And what I'm trying to do in a way is get that breath into the painting, but also how long it takes you to make a stroke. 1001, 1002, or 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's ways to bring sonic memories or sense memory of where you are in relationship to the object into the making of an object. And so the Scriptronics thing, actually, I have a whole methodology and series of things that I've worked out on this. What we're doing right here, this one's called a marine. So is
this going to be a new painting?
Well, if you look at the painting on the left and you look at that one thing is I'm always studying where I start the first wave. And I found that by drawing, sometimes I have these basic habits like you would. You may start at the very top, somebody else may start at the very bottom, but it's also how hard you push the drawing. What I use is the magic markers. I use a contact microphone on the magic marker coming through a set of foot pedals. And I use a looper. And people who play music will know what a looper is, but a looper is basically a small recorder that you can, a device that you can activate by your foot. So you go dun dun dun, and you memorize that, and now you can play over it. I leave the guitar there because a lot of times I kind of get stuck on the drawing, and I want to kind of play a riff on the guitar, so I can kind of feel a little bit.
Get in trance.
Got it. Get a little bit more into it, and so. This one's called a marine. I have a different one. So I have a one that you can do with other people, Scriptronics, where we can do it together. And you'll draw a form, I'll draw a form, you'll draw a form, I'll draw a form. One of these days, maybe the Phillips will have me over. I would love to do a Scriptronics workshop.
As long as we start doing things in person.
Yeah. Oh no, this is, and it's really, I mean, it can be really fun. I've had all kind of people do it, from little children to, people who have no visual interest. They all of a sudden, wait, they can find something.
Because it's about rhythm, and it's a very bodily thing to do. And you mentioned to me that actually the methodology, that this became a tool for autism or dementia. So he has some healing power to this.
I've always, to be honest with you, I've always wanted to partner with somebody from the medical world, and figure out if there's a way to adapt this psychological health. I had a young autistic girl draw one day. I did this out at the McLean Center one time, and I handed her the pen, and she just took off, and it was incredible. The sense of rhythm and the sense of intensity in which she was kind of constructed the sound from the inside out. I don't even know how to explain it. It was pretty remarkable.
When you think it's very primal, you know, the bodily movement of your hands or your body just moving with the sound of inside of yourself or outside, and drawing. I mean, all
Right.
of us start with drawing as children, so that stays on.
I think that one
And
of
the element of touch.
no, the element of touch, I think, is really, and also, you know, how hard you mash the pen. I can alter the density. I mean, I can alter the sound. Can I do it one time here? Okay. It's kind of, I mean, this is pretty esoteric, this whole thing at this point, because it's like, no, turn the looper off. There it is. Okay, because I don't want to have a, I'll just give you an idea of how this works. Okay. Can we see these over here a little bit? And I'll give you, kind of, give you a run through. Okay, that's the looper. So I have a, in my chain, in my chain, I basically have an echo, a fuzz, a phaser. I have a thing called a bad monkey, which is just kind of like a preamp. Flanger, super chorus, digital A, and a ditto. So if we just take, this is raw. We'll get this raw. Now, as hard as I mash, watch what the sound change. So I can control the sound with the tip of the pen to make it denser, make it lighter. If I add echo, the note is catching back up to me. Okay, so if I want to add, I'm going to add a little bit of fuzz, which will make it a deeper, more sonic sound. We'll make it crash.
So it's not just a movement, it's a pressure too.
Where to touch it? Is that like waves?
Yep.
It feels like waves.
Sound waves.
So, I mean, there's more to this than meets the eye. So, and it's basically a tool for me to stay sharp. Does that make any sense? For me to like stay sharp.
But it's also focused. It's very meditative. You're
Yes.
controlling something. At the same time, you're letting go.
Right.
And it's very intuitive and very bodily and very physical and mental as well.
Yeah. Exactly. It's very. It really what I think what it really does is it sensitizes your cellular.
It's very much about bodily coordination of everything.
Yeah, it's almost molecular in a way, because you're hearing what you're moving. You know what I mean? When you dance, you don't really hear that, you know, but yet I'm kind of dancing and I'm hearing it.
Yeah.
And I'm also, when I paint, that's when I make those sounds to myself. Remember, I used to be a synthesizer player, so I can make like. So in a way, I have those sounds integrated into my psyche. So when I'm painting, often they'll come out and I'll find myself humming or making the sound.
Speaking of synesthesia, the whole phenomena of
Yeah.
correspondence of senses. So that's definitely, that's what
Yeah,
work is.
and I think
It's
this
about.
enhances it. I think having played the synthesizer in particular has enhanced that aspect of
Yeah, they feed each other, sound and then the visual. Catherine, can we go to the next slide? Okay, can we go to next? I am looking for something. Yes, this one. So the petals that you saw are in this piece.
Yes,
Okay.
many of the ones on the floor.
Which is, I haven't seen anything like this.
Vesela, at some point I said to myself, you know, I want to be more holistic. I want to communicate and cross over. And I said, you know what, why not start making like essentially sculpture that is evocative of music and whatever. So this is 50-foot petals, and they're all interconnected. So, and they're also color coded by my daughter, Hannah. So the irony is this could never do anything, because without an input and an output, you're not going to have any sound, right? But this is input into input into input. So it goes input, output, input, output, 100 inputs and outputs. And in a way, it kind of, it is like a almost spiritual, because it doesn't have a purpose. But its purpose is essentially psychological. What happened was this got posted. One of the foot pedals I have, a lady saw this, and one of her pedals was in the thing, and they posted it on Boing Boing. Have you ever heard of Boing Boing? I'd never even heard of it. And it went viral, went all over the world. This image, I'm not normally in the image, right? It's just a beautiful mandala, right? But, and then I get these funny emails back from these guitar players, and the guy said, dude, man, I bet you that sounds like a mother, you know, and the other guy says, dude, that couldn't play. You can't play without output and without an input. And somebody else was, who gives a, you know, we don't really, you know, and it was really funny, but I had people from Singapore, I had people from New Zealand, all kind of people reaching out saying, dude, that is the coolest piece. So it worked.
Yeah, it worked. And it's, you know, it's kind of an anomaly almost.
Yeah.
Yes and no, but because it's only when I looked at these pedals here that I connected that to this piece. Right. So it was very interesting, and also taking you away from what you know best, and that's painting, and into a different format.
Yeah.
I realized that we are slowly getting running out of time. So maybe we can, Catherine, could we just move to the next slide? Okay. Well, tell us about this painting. It was done at a particular historical moment, going back to the painting and what you're known best for. So
it's a triptych. And I painted this, the great irony, the title of this painting is Descent. And I'm not claiming it has any political basis or anything like that. But I do think that I finished this painting the day before Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And I think that the painting is sort of visionary. Often I think my paintings are quite temporal. They seem to come to me in a way that they seem to have a time stamp on them. They seem to function in a specific period of time. I have a whole set of paintings I just finished that are all,
we'll get to that, yes,
in a specific period of time. But this painting is the purple interior is just like a fantastic purple ghost. In the middle. The one in the middle, yes. Yeah, and I think everybody would agree that recently it's been a very strange period of time, historically. So did the title come after the fact, the historical fact of Donald Trump, or it was named to kind of create association, or when you say it was a visionary painting, or it is a visionary painting for you? I think I think I myself and everybody else was saying, "My God, what's happening? Is this possible? We did, yeah. What's going to happen?" I mean, I'm not making a statement here politically as much as I think that there's just a lot of people very anxious about the future at this time, because nobody knew where and what it was going to be like. It's very foggy. Yeah, which takes us then to the next step. Catherine, can we please have a next slide? And takes us to the present moment and your current show at Hemphill Artworks through May 28. Maybe we can just go through slides quickly, maybe some installation shots. There are 19 paintings, and the show is called, okay, can we just stay on the first one? The first one. The blue one, the breath. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was talking to you earlier, Vesela. I was that if there's any one subject that seems to be predominant, I think in most everybody's mind right now, is breath, breathing, and that this phenomena, this pandemic that we're in, it's all about breath. And that breath can mean a lot of things, you know, broadness, or it can be the physical, but this painting is a diptych, and it actually functions like a pair of lungs. And as a child, I grew up in an area in Florida that's very primitive, and there's springs all over Florida, much like if people have been to Mexico, they've been to cenotes, these beautiful wells of water that are 80 feet deep, perfectly clear. That we had those all around where I lived. And at 8 years old, I used to go swimming in this place, and it's famous, where Johnny Weissmuller made all those Tarzan movies. It's called Silver Springs. And the water was 72 degrees at all times. And I remember jumping in the water. The water's perfectly clear. I would jump in the water and sink down 10 feet and look up, and you see this kind of color. And so I was thinking in my life, is there a moment in my life where I felt perfectly pure? And I think it was when I was 8 years old, diving in this water, looking straight up. I mean, I'm a romantic, unabashed romantic. I believe there is such a thing as a whole which is greater than the sum of its parts. This painting came to me at the most bizarre circumstance, because Judy and Hannah and I went out to, we have a beach house we bought out in Delaware. It's one of these places that's not insulated, so you have to close it up. And I have a little one car garage that I turned into a studio. And we got there on the 12th
Of March. So
yeah, 12th of March to stay 2 weeks.
this is the beginning of pandemic.
Exactly. And nobody really knew what was going to really happen. And I started this painting. In 3 days, I painted it. And I just looking at it and thinking, why did I do this? You know, I didn't know. So a couple of weeks later, I wake up in the middle of the night and I see another word, the word drowsy.
Can we just go to the
Yeah.
next slide?
And so, you know, this word came, and I didn't fight it. I just tried to remember drowsy. I don't know why. Next day I get up and I start painting this painting. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, you know,
Let's move on.
yeah,
Catherine,
I
thank
can
you.
come up with nestle, which is, you can't hardly see it, but it's blue, purple, it's got, and this is not a word, I've never even used nestle. I would think Nestle, right?
Yeah, I
Nestle.
was thinking of that.
Yeah, and then
Like-
rouse, that's not a word I would ever use. And then the next word, painting, the next would go quickly, and then seam, and then snare, and keep going. Dissonance, I mean, look at that, you know, ponder. What's the last time I used the word ponder? I've never used the word ponder. Abraham Lincoln uses ponder, you know, esteem. So I keep going, we can go through these really fast. So each time the title came to me in the middle of the night, after about 2 or 3 weeks after I'd finished the other painting. And so I would just memorize, I'm sure that what's happened, my working out all this stuff through my subconscious comes up in the middle of the night with a single word, you know, I'm sure. But when you look at the paintings, and you look at the whole show, you kind of like, they seem almost schizophrenic. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other. And I think they're more like the Beatles' White Album. All the really great songs, but they were so
Desperate.
you know, odd, you know, this one's spin. And then the last painting, this one, is like your favorite childhood blanket that's been washed so many times that it's fuzzy and has kind of feels good. And it's kind of like this, it's release. And this was a painting I painted outside in 34-degree temperature on a 3-day period, because my studio was so cold inside. As soon as I'd turn my vent on, it would suck all the hot air out anyway. So Judy and I'd gone out to Delaware with bottled water, because the water was already turned off at the house. And we were out there, and I painted this painting. And the next day was the inauguration, the 20th. And so
January.
so much kind of happened between March 15th and the 20th of January. It's strange things, odd,
So there are
unique.
19 paintings that are a result of this
Got it.
historical period.
Yeah.
And that can be seen at the gallery through May.
And look, if you want to do some research, look up the significance of the word number 19. That's something.
Tell us.
Well, I mean, there are 19 angels that guard the gates of hell. That's one thing. 19 is the beginning of the Quran. So 19 is above them all. So it's the beginning and the end of numbers, and the sequence starts again. So it's about the renewal of a sequence. And then there's a part of your brain
The visual cortex.
visual cortex is called, what's it called, Judy?
The visual cortex is called the Brodmann area 19.
The Brodmann area 19. And it's your visual cortex.
Behind the camera woman is the scientist as well. So we
Yeah, right. So, but but the sequence of paintings, which is phenomenal, because I had them in this room, and I've been studying them, and now they're in the gallery. But I just feel so honored, and I feel so honored that these things came to me at this time. And I think I could have been, a lot of people, I think, been very confused this period of time. And I think it was a way for me to work out whatever it is. And now I'm kind of waiting for the next word. I haven't had a word since the 20th. I've been playing my guitar a lot.
You have to play your guitar so the words will come. So let's just have a last slide, and then with that we can, this is something that you told me, maybe we can, where I am is where it is at.
I got this from Walter Hopps. Walter was a curator at the Corcoran. You should research Walter, what a fascinating character. When I was always in a band, so at night when I was living on Columbia Road, I'd get home like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd unload my equipment, and I'd go to the 7-Eleven. There'd be Walter, and Walter would be between writing, say, for a catalog or organizing an exhibit or something at the Corcoran, and Walter and I would sit out on a bench, and Walter would smoke cigarettes and drink Coca-Cola at 3 in the morning, and I would be just trying to wind down. I'd be so, hyped up from playing music and that whole scene. And I think we kind of were like ships in the night, but we were there. And I just used to listen to Walter talk. He was a fascinating guy. And one day he said to me, he said, "Robin, you must wear your neurosis on your sleeve." I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. And he said, "Remember, where you are is where it's at." Sort of like be here now, or the whole thing. And I've always taken that, and I'm a radical preventionist. I believe that where I am is where it's at, and where you are, Vesela, is where it's at. I mean, if we always thinking where it's at is somewhere else,
We will never be anywhere.
Resino in betweeno, remember?
So shall we hear another sound track and then have answers and question and answer period? We can finish the presentation, Catherine. Thank you so much. Are we playing anything or?
Okay, it's up to you. Do you want to play it now, or do you want to have the questions
Let's
first?
maybe, Catherine, shall we move to the answers and questions and answers, and then at the very end we can play.
Yeah, I think
some
that'd
music
probably
too.
be easy to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for such an engaging conversation so far. We have a couple questions in our chat. The first is from Jane McAllister. Robin, did your band play at DC Space?
Definitely. We were we were right in the beginning of DC Space, and Bill O'Rourke ran DC Space and did a fabulous job bringing avant-garde music to DC, and we were right in there in the very beginning.
We also played at WPA at the Corcoran.
Oh yeah, we got a record contract playing at the Corcoran with the B-52s. I don't know if you know that band. They signed my band, the B-52s, and Devo the same week, and they sent our people down to the Corcoran to see us play, and we played for Halloween. It was an outrageous scene. It was great, and we were really good that night. The B-52s were really good. It was really a lot of fun. And then the Urban Verbs Robert Goldstein and I essentially started the Atlantis Club. The Atlantis Club morphed into being the 930 Club. We went to the owner of the 930 Club, the Atlantis building, Paul, and Robert had rented a space from Paul to run his art hanging business out of. And there were a bunch of artists living in the Atlantic building. And we said, "Look, Paul, we're part of a, kind of an art scene. We've got a lot of people like our band. We just need a place to practice." And he says, "Okay, you can practice here, but you got to play for free." And we said, "No problem, dude, we'll play for free." So the funny thing was, where we practiced had 6 inches of water. So we went out and we bought cinder blocks and plywood, and put them on the top of the water, and you could hear the rats swim underneath the plywood. It was a punk scene. It was terrible. And we practiced for 3 weeks. We got 9 songs together. We called up our friends, the Slicky Boys and Mr. Ott and a bunch of local bands, and we played, and it was just unbelievable. Like 200 people came. So we said, wow, who are these people? You know, people with mohawks and that, you know, razor blades stuck to their earlobe, this kind of stuff. So we played 2 more weeks later, and 300 people come. Now, this isn't an illegal club. It has no license, nothing, you know. And so the 3rd night we played, and I can't remember who we played with, but I think it was someone from New York. And all I remember is this guy came up to me, and he had a pork pie hat on, he had a red and white plaid jacket, and a pair of green striped pants, and a band wide shirt, and had a cigar. And he said, "Are you boys members of the union?" And I said, "The union? What do you mean the union?" He said, "You can't play in DC if you're not a member of the union." And I said, I said, "I don't know. How do we become the members of the union?" He said, "Well, if you're not members of the union, I'm shutting it down." I said, "Well, how do we become the members of the union?" And he gets up and he goes over and he picks up the phone off the wall, makes a phone call, and 30 minutes later, the fire trucks show up and they close the whole thing down. Wow. And that was the end of the Atlantis Club. And then Dodie Bowers bought the Atlantic building, and she and Seth Horwitz, who's now Mr. 930, they started the 930 Club. Interesting Washington, D.C. story.
Interesting. Is there anything like that now?
I don't, you know, probably in people's basements, you know, things you wouldn't know about. I mean, this was right at the beginning of the punk scene. I mean, you know, the Black Market Baby, you know, there was a lot of the punk bands in DC, HR, you know, the Bad Brains, Slicky Boys, Raz. A lot of these bands were playing around town, but the 930 Club was where people coalesced. And then they started bringing in really groups with names, you know, people with, you know, world-class bands from all over the place. And it was a great place to see music. It was very intimate, really dark and intense. It's more like CBGBs. And then they opened the new 930 Club, which had the best sound system on the East Coast, but it was anything but what with the original 930 Club was just claustrophobic and dark and scary. And but that was great fun. And I painted during the day and I played music at night. I don't know how I did it. I still to this day don't know how I did it. In fact, my first one-person show in New York was 1979 at the Elise Meyer Gallery, and I was having a show, and at the same time I was at Media Sound working on Urban Verb's first album. So I was up literally all night because it was cheaper to you know, record really late at night. And of course, no one could go to sleep. It was New York City in 1979. But
sounds like you didn't have time to sleep anyway. It was a great DC story. Barbara Janisevich asked, Robin, do you dream color and hear music in your dreams?
Would I hear music in my dreams?
You dream color.
Do I dream?
Hear music in your dreams.
That's kind of a, you know, that's sort of I've never been asked that question. I'm gonna have to start listening better. Yeah, I really am. I'm gonna have to try to look closer and listen better. I will say this, that the titles to my paintings come first, and they're like a roadmap, or literally like a map to the cosmos. So they're kind of like an opening in the fissure of sound and light and color. And they often have this kind of onomatopoeia quality that when I'm open, they're almost like opening a Pandora's box. The word kind of opens the box. It flips the proscenium and allows me to come into where the pain is going to occur. And but I don't know if I really dream in sound or see things in sound. I don't think I've ever even thought about that. I will start listening better and start trying to remember if I do.
So speaking of words, do you ever think of your work as narrative?
Absolutely.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a temporal aspect to my work, and that they're done at a specific period of time. I don't see how anybody could make anything and it's not some form of narrative. I don't think it's impossible. Jackson Pollock, there was a certain narrative there. You see that those paintings, some are very agitated, they're frenetic. Other ones are dense and claustrophobic. You know, you see somebody like Robert Irwin and you see this gorgeous light and you think, well, what's the narrative behind that? I guess, you know, the uplifting spiritual potential of the work. I mean, for me, it's like, I am looking for the painting, not a painting. And what I mean by that is I pass over so many paintings, and there's so many paintings under these that most of the time, I mean, I could do 50 paintings a week for what it is when I do one painting. Because at a certain level I could stop, and that would be a painting. At a certain level I could stop, but I'm looking for the painting. So I do an awful lot of editing, and I do a lot of editing forward and backwards into the painting, so that when the paintings are finished, what I'm really looking for is for them to hum, literally hum. I want to hear a hum, and I want them to look as though they happened by themselves. I don't want the effort to show. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, they're effortless.
Yeah, and so they become more classical in that sense, and then timeless. That's really what I'm looking for, the timeless nature. I was quiet. And here's a real fast story. I met Bob Rauschenberg many years ago, who my friend Terry Van Brunt was Bob's assistant. And Terry was living in a teepee with his 16-year-old wife in a Swedish chemical toilet. And back we're talking about 1968, and I was in college, and Terry and I were really close friends. And he said, I'm going to go down and see my friend Bob. He's an artist. I said, okay, because I'm in art school. Imagine this, right? First year in graduate school, actually. And he said, we're going to go down to see Bob. I said, okay, let's go. And he had a 1949 Chevrolet black, looked like a gangster car. And we headed south. Now, Tallahassee's way up in the panhandle of Florida. So we drove like 4.5 hours to where? Captiva, Florida. So I didn't know what I was getting into. And we drove into this, and there was this magnificent modernist house right on the water, with palm trees all around it, secluded. And the car pulls up, and I see this door, the doors fly open, and I see this guy, Terry. And I'm looking, and I realize who it is, because I have art books, right? It's Bob Rauschenberg. I said, oh my God, Terry, that's Rauschenberg. And he said, yeah, he and I are really good friends. I've been his assistant for years, right? So it was Rauschenberg, Cy Twombly, and Bryce Marden for the long weekend.
Not bad.
Yeah, on the way out, because I'm a rock collector, I have this box I made for the people that we're going to stay with. I knew Bob was, and I have a wooden box, and inside the box I have a geode. And I would go look for these prehistoric geodes, these 40 million year old coral agate that's part in Florida you can find. So I had this geode about this big, and I took a hammer and I hit it, and it broke it in half. It was just gorgeous inside, all these sparkling crystals and stuff. And I put it in the box, and I have the box, and I have it on the floorboard of the car, and we're getting ready to leave, and Bob comes up with it. Robin, nice to meet you, Bob. And I said, Bob, by the way, here's a little gift. And he has the box, and he puts the box in the hood of the car, and he takes the rock out, and he holds the rock, and he opens the rock, and he's looking like this. He puts the rock back and puts it back in the box, and he said, I would have liked it better if you didn't break it in half. And he said to me, curiosity, that's the key, Robin.
Huh. Well, that describes you very well.
Yeah.
Hearing all your passions and processes and brain workings, all of that, certainly. Enigma and curiosity.
Yeah, enigma, curiosity.
I have another technical question from Kevin M. Robin, you may be reluctant to reveal your secrets, but if not, what kinds of devices do you use to achieve your amazing textures? It seems different types of irons are one of them. Are they specialized or custom shapes and sizes?
Yes, okay. One of the things I was talking about earlier is how what I really do is I actually create a different technology for each painting. I'm trying to get the painting to be what it is. So in some cases, I may use a hot nail, or I may use a photographer's tacking iron, or a flat iron. I use tacking irons, flat irons. I scrape a lot with razor blades. I use a torch. I use a mini torch, like a little torch. I even use the torch that we use to do our food. You know, maybe you brown the top of your custard. I will put water down and drop hot wax into it. I'm like an alchemist, and I have to figure out phenomenologically how to apply the medium, right? So often I will, like, for instance, melt everything and have it all come in goo together. And then I'll take a razor blade and scrape away the goo and I could see if I can find like a ghost or a central image that's somehow in there that's part of the image component of the painting that's been obscured because I've melted everything away. But if I scrape back, I can maybe get back to that. And then, for instance, I could overlay clear wax to build up, or tinted wax to build up texture and distance between the scraped back excavated section of the painting. I'm always looking for things to alter the surface and stuff. But yes, I use torches, I use irons, I use soldering irons, I use wire scrapers, I use steel wool. That's a great one. I just told you, right, a good one right there. Most people wouldn't think of that one yet. So I'm like a mad scientist, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't want to be, but I seem to be drawn that
Maybe
way.
you have no choice.
I'm cursed.
Have you ever thought at school?
I used to do critiques. I'm at Maryland Art Institute, Corcoran, University of Maryland.
And you will be doing it
No
tomorrow.
one's asked me lately. I'm always ready for critiques, but I used to do probably 2 a year at Maryland, and I'm really good at critiques because I'm like a one night stand. You know, I come in, the artist's not going to bond. There's no, they're not going to get a grade. They don't have to remember me. They don't have to say I'm sorry or anything. And but as a faculty member, it's just not happened for me. I mean, I'm not quite sure why. I think I really know why, but I don't.
You didn't have time.
That, and I think maybe people were wise enough to not hire me permanently.
Well, you will have a bunch of students tomorrow. We'll be lucky to have you.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Tomorrow,
Thank you for reminding me.
University
Yes.
of Maryland. Catherine, do we have any more questions?
We do have one more question from a name I'm familiar with, Hannah Rose. She says, "Hi, Dad. Which one of the 19 paintings was your favorite to create and why?" And let me know if you want me to put it back up on the screen.
Yeah, say it one more time.
What is the favorite painting of the 19?
Of the 19
paintings? It's really a toss-up for me between the first one I started, which is Breath, and the last painting, Release. Because if you think about what breathing is, it's bringing in and releasing out, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really, Hannah, it's between those two paintings. All the rest of them are included in that because they were the way I got to the release. Mm-hmm. So their DNA is embedded in the very last painting, but I can't distinguish between the first painting and the last painting, which is the most important because they function physiologically together. One is just letting go and floating up, the other one is coming in and going out. So, and the colors are sort of indicative of that kind of, Caribbean freedom in the water, But thank you, Hannah, for asking.
Well, we'd like to thank you all for staying tonight with us. And I'd like to call a special person of tonight who was behind the camera to join us for a second. Judy Pensky Rose, come say hi. Somebody likes to be behind the camera, but thank you so much for doing this for us. We will play a music to say goodbye, whoever wants to stay. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure to be here in your space and to converse. With that, let's listen to some music and say goodbye.
I'm always up for.
We started with sound, we'll end with sound.
See you guys.
We did have an attendee ask, "Isn't Hannah Rose an artist too?" And I can answer that one. I know she is because her proud father shared her page with me, and so she's an artist currently
Learn
finishing
more.
her graduate degree at SCAD. So as Robin sets up.
And what are we listening at the end?
I think we're listening to Terminal Bar. Robin?
It's coming.
I think it's Terminal Bar.
It's called Terminal Bar.
Pretty slow. But this particular song has a lot of the elements. It was really difficult. I mean, I always had it was interesting. People didn't know how to relate to what I was doing in this group, because I was using the synthesizer in a very different way than most people use it, where they're interested in playing essentially notes to make up melodies and stuff. I was using it really to construct sonic tapestries.
Can I make it louder?
It's coming.
It's coming.
And
It's kicking in.
yeah, and it was a kind of at a time when a lot of new technologies were becoming available to people, and synthesizers especially that were portable. And I used an ARP Odyssey, which is the simplest synthesizer you could find. And the reason I used it is because instead of knobs that you turn from right to left on a Moog synthesizer, the ARP had switches that you push out and pull back. So it's much more like real music. You push music out, you pull music back. And so I found, I learned how to use this thing in real time, which was in and to itself kind of unique.
It's very much, it's so psychological and moody.
Yeah, I mean, we were symphonic. This was symphonic, you know, it's not just your straight up pump, right? Yeah, you know. And we're kind of mixed between like a velvet underground and an orange.
Feel free to dance.
Here's my onomatopoeia. He's winning a horse. So let me use the synthesizer to create that horse sound. It's called the Terminal Bar, which was this wild and crazy bar on the west side. And when we were in New York, we go, eat at 4 o'clock in the morning. Insects thrive in the Terminal Bar. My lead singer, Roddy France, was brilliant at these kind of sort of cinematic descriptions. And his singing technique was very interesting. And then somebody, like Robert said, he was like a young Peter O'Toole. Artist by the score, meaning he used to give me a hard time about being a painter, right? You can imagine, right? A big hit on top 40 radio. That's what it says.